Emotionally, once the shock of it had passed, I realized that I was for the most part unaffected by Tony's death. Sad but true. It was tragic, naturally, but that was all. It gave a strange feeling, but strange feelings I could handle. Maybe there would be unforeseen feelings yet to present themselves further down the road. But until then, life for a young Michael would go on largely unchanged. And this was something I wasn't terribly unhappy about. In the car on the way to Bayou St. John, Carol asked Phyllis a series of brief questions about people whose names I didn't know. Her questions were spaced about a minute apart, and for each Phyllis had a short answer that Carol seemed to know already. A little like the conversation near the family garden between Michael Corleone and his forgetful father in The Godfather. Right, of course. Yeah, don't worry about that. Good. It's taken care of. So then we'll call them tonight? And then, I wonder where they'll happen to have it. And then it was deciphered. Tony's funeral. After all, he was dead. Possibly still at the hospital. If not at the morgue or wherever dead people are stored 2 days after their event. Of course. And if he was going to get a funeral, arrangements would need to be made. Quickly and efficiently. Them must be his parents. Or else his other family members. Tony came from up north in Indiana somewhere, so maybe the funeral would be up there. Carol and Phyllis talked between themselves, working out some details. Up on Carrollton, approaching the Beauregard Rotary, the traffic quickly got worse. It was still Jazz Fest, Sunday, the huge final day with performances by major headliners. Weather-wise, it was another day like the previous Thursday, hot, with the occasional small dark cloud and a chance of an afternoon thunderstorm. Later in the day, the Neville Brothers would play the last set and close down the festival. When Phyllis stopped the car, Carol got out. She stood on the sidewalk by her driveway and patted herself lightly for her house keys. Phyllis, who must have known Carol had them, drove on as soon as Carol's door was closed. There were things to do. A few blocks underway, I leaned forward, as any good friend of a friend would do, and inquired how she thought Carol was doing. "She's okay, Michael," Phyllis said, staring ahead to the road. She paused before speaking again. "This will be a very tough week for everyone. But somehow we'll all get through it. That much I know." She paused again. "By the way, Carol was definitely very touched that you came today." "Touched?" "She said you were very sweet to come." "Well, you know, I'm glad to help," I offered, though looking out my side window, questioning for a second if Carol had really noticed, or what difference it made if she had or hadn't. "Even so," Phyllis answered, "you're important to her. And by coming along for the ride, she knows you haven't disappeared. She likes you, Michael. We like you." "Well," I began to Phyllis weakly, but I stopped. My thought process, without notice, did a hard, careless U-turn. I felt a bit unanchored. Part of me wanted to be more attached, more affected than I was, one of the gang and not the slipstream outsider. So much so that I started lying. "I bet you and Carol didn't realize that." A lie. Tony and I were not good friends. Tony and I were good enemies. for lack of a better word, even if he didn't know it. Chief rivals in an undeclared, unfought competition. In another way, Tony was like a brother. The kind of brother, if presented with the opportunity, you might bump off a cliff to steal a throne or avenge a slighted mother. Of course we realized it. Tony liked you. Why would you say that? Phyllis asked me. I mean, I practically saw the damn thing happen. I'm not exactly unaffected by all this. More to the point, really, was why wasn't I more affected? No, began Phyllis, turning around to get a good look at me. Of course you're not. I imagine it's weird for you, too. Tony was a good guy, I protested in a light spasm of questionable grief. Tony and I were actually pretty good friends, clearly a bit surprised. I was suddenly quite bewildered by the state of things and tried to salvage the lost dignity. I don't know, I guess just don't worry about Carol too much. If you know Carol at all, and I think you do, you'll know she doesn't want people worrying about her. Of course. That I did know. Phyllis had switched the topic back from sad, dead Tony to Carol. Carol was alive. Grieving, but otherwise alive. The air in the car was clean. Not seeming to know what she was doing, Phyllis parked and got out as though she were home. She looked worried, but then in another flash, sort of sad. She stopped at the Chrysler's trunk, putting a hand on it as though to consider what was inside and what she might need with it, then smiled hastily, got back in the car and pulled off. A puzzling display, but not really, all things considered.